What if vegetables and other plants were causing all your problems? This diet completely excludes fruits and vegetables and says you should only eat meat to lose weight. It doesn't make sense, but it works.
I lost 52 lb.
I lost 50 lb.
Lost over 100 lb.
Lost 105 lb.
I lost 125 lb.
I'm never hungry.
The big question is, why would only meat solve so many people's problems? I don't have that brain fog.
I came off my antidepressants after about 3 months. It was like no more meds at all. My depression is gone, okay?
Within a week, I was 25% less anxious in the morning. Within 2 weeks, 75%, and I've been better every single day.
I used to get severe migraines that are just now gone.
In August of 2021, Michela Peterson was invited to do a TED Talk. She told her story of how, from the time she was a child, she suffered from arthritis that was so bad she had to get an artificial hip and ankle. She suffered from depression, bipolar disorder, chronic fatigue, and she was sleeping 17 hours a day thanks to all the medication she was on: methotrexate and neoxcortisone, and one methotrexate put on SSRIs, put on OxyContin Tylenol 3 to take at night, 40 mg of Adderall. Just to wake up, I was taking Dapsone, Talipram for the depression strength antihistamine. If I don't figure out what's wrong with me, I'm going to die. The solution to her years and years of crippling health problems was surprisingly simple yet kind of strange, and I cut everything out except for beef. 2 weeks after doing that, the itch went away and my joints started to feel better. 4 weeks after that, the depression lifted and I stopped crying in the morning, and 5 months after that, the anxiety lifted and I was back in what I felt was heaven. But TEDx refused to upload her talk. I followed TEDx's guidelines very carefully. I was the only talk from that TEDx conference that they refused to post. Her story isn't based on a scientific study, it's just an anecdote, but apparently it was the wrong anecdote. You see, Michela made significant progress on her health problems by cutting out most plant foods from her diet. Then she pretty much completely solved her health issues by cutting out plant foods entirely. She only eats meat. Meanwhile, TED didn't have any problem uploading people's personal anecdotes about how a vegan diet helped them. In fact, TED has uploaded at least 43 different talks on veganism.
I've only been eating meat for beef fundamentally for almost 5 years now.
Dr. Sean Baker has been on the carnivore diet for 7 years, and he runs a website where people share their success stories on the diet. Strangely enough, over 1,000 entries discuss all kinds of conditions including diabetes, hypertension, skin conditions, chronic gut issues, arthritis, mental health disorders, and others improving or even appearing to be completely cured on a carnivore diet. So what is going on here? Obviously, meat isn't just magic, but why does a meat-and diet seem to cure all these ailments? There's got to be a very specific reason. Also, what about nutrient deficiencies? And aren't these people's guts going to be totally wrecked without fiber for 4½ months, had lived on literally nothing but fish and water? The story starts back in 1906, when explorer V. Homer Stephenson was left stranded in the Arctic. Being stranded in such a harsh environment where nothing grows would normally be a death sentence. Stanson was baffled that not only could the inn be perfectly healthy on an almost completely plantless diet, but that he could as well. And at the end of 4½ months, I was Healy, and I never been before. So over 100 years ago, Stephenson was a proponent of the so-called carnivore diet, and he noted that the Innu who stayed on the traditional diet and were not exposed to European foods, they had fantastic teeth that were completely free of cavities. They also didn't have cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. And lastly, no, they did not have scurvy. It still seems to be a puzzle why people like Sean Baker, who has been eating mainly just cooked steaks for 7 years, mysteriously doesn't have scurvy. One reason he might be protected from this is that meat, especially if it's raw, does in fact have a little bit of vitamin C. Further, your vitamin C requirements may be far lower if you don't eat any carbohydrate, because glucose actually inhibits vitamin C transport in the body. In fact, in Stanson's 1936 article Adventures in Diet, he noted that men could be cured of scurvy if they were transitioned to a meat diet. You see, back in the early 1900s, people didn't believe it was possible to live on an all-meat diet, and thought that the less meat you ate, the better for you. It was thought that meat would cause arthritis, hardening of the arteries, high blood pressure, and kidney damage. So Stephenson and his friend Karsten volunteered to eat a meat-and diet while under supervision at Bellevue Hospital for an entire year. Some of the investigators thought that the men would die in under 3 months on this diet. At one point in the experiment, Stanson was feeling unwell and had some gastrointestinal issues, but this was because he was instructed to eat lean meat. Stephenson had known just how important eating plenty of fat is in the success of the diet. In fact, his book on the topic is called Fat of the Land. Stephenson began eating much more fat and all his problems went away to the amazement of all the investigators. Stephenson and Anderson's meat-only diet did not cause any of the health problems that people were worried about. They were perfectly healthy and had in fact reduced their blood pressure and lost weight. This was no surprise to Stephenson, as he knew the Inu were very fit and trim under their baggy clothes now. Both men on the meat diet remarked that they passed much less gas. The investigators were in fact so interested in the topic of gas that they used an X-ray to observe that there was indeed less gas in the intestinal tract. The oldest carnivore success story I could find was one from 1886 in the British Medical Journal. A man went on a meat-and diet. He lost 14 lbs. He claimed that his mental and bodily activity doubled and his intestinal gas completely went away. Okay, so that's nice, but who cares? This might seem like just a funny observation, but let's take a close look at what's going on in our gut, because gut function is actually really important to our overall health. Diversity is king and queen and everything in between. When it comes to gut health and longevity, I think full-on 90 days of carnivore, my results actually got better, my diversity got better. There's a lot of talk about the so-called gut-brain connection. Lately in 2016, Dr. Emmerin Mayer wrote a book called The Mind-Gut Connection, where he discusses the intimate connection between gut function and mental issues like anxiety or depression. In fact, 5 different studies on various groups of people all found that constipation was associated with depression. Another study published just last year found constipation to be correlated with major depression in American adults. Now these are just correlations, but other studies have found that people who have the inflammatory gut condition IBS to have significantly higher levels of anxiety and depression. Interestingly, you'll find plenty of anecdotes online of people claiming to have resolved their gut issues and depression on a meat-and diet. All bloating and indigestion, GERD, anything like that, it's completely gone.
This is very effective for dealing with depression. You do feel a level of both mental clarity, and then even digestive health was really good after the first 8 days.
Now I no longer suffer with anxiety, I no longer suffer with depression.
On the other hand, there have been cases of long-term vegans finally quitting their high-fiber diet, specifically because it caused so many gut issues for them. Hurting my stomach, bloating, bloated, a lot, bloating, really bad gastrointestinal issues, digestive illnesses like this that were so severe. My intestines were actually bleeding really bad pain after I would eat blood in my stool. We've been told that the gut absolutely needs fiber. We need calcium for strong bones, protein for strong muscles, and fiber for a healthy gut. I'm sure most people would worry that they would be constipated if they didn't have any fiber, but why would we need indigestible substance to keep our digestive tract healthy? Consider this bizarre study presented by Dr. Paul Mason. Here, this case control study looked at 63 different patients with constipation, and they gave them a high or low or zero fiber diet. As we can see, people experienced worsened symptoms when on a high fiber diet, then a reduced fiber diet actually reduced symptoms. So the question is, what happened to those who had zero fiber in their diet? This is not a mistake. I didn't just forget to put something in the side there. Not one patient on the zero fiber diet had any symptoms. That's quite astonishing, really. One found that people on a fiber-enriched diet had far more gas evacuation. So we eat a lot of fiber, so we have gas. And another study found that indeed, when you increase the fiber, you increase gas production. Fiber was really messing me up in that respect, and I just felt better from a gut perspective without it. Your gut is so inflamed right now, you can't tolerate all this fiber you're eating every day. 14 out of 15 years. A vegan, and now I'm going to eat just animal foods, right? Go on a carnivore diet, removing all fiber. I started eating eggs, and then I started eating meat instantly. Gut inflammation gone, bloating, gas gone.
But I often get bloated. I make stomach cramps sometimes. And when I was on the C diet, I did not have any stomach graze of bloating once ever, than any ES of symptoms look CBR.
Okay, so here's the thing about gas. It's not just about being bloated and uncomfortable, but methane gas buildup in the intestine can actually slow down the contractile processes in the small intestine, which can result in constipation. Ironically, we've been told for decades that the solution to constipation is more fiber. How could you get as strong as an ox without eating any meat? Have you ever seen an ox eating meat? I just do the same things as these big gray things out here. We trying to protect elephant and RI just stick to plants. Cellulose is really hard to break down well unless you're an animal like a cow. In the pro-vegan documentary of the Game Changers, they argue that, well, gorillas eat tons of plants and they're really big and strong. I mean, look at a gorilla. A gorilla will eat you up in 2 seconds. Music. What is a gorilla? but gorillas have a completely different and huge gut, designed to handle tons and tons of plant fiber. Gorillas, by the way, are well known for constantly burping and passing gas throughout the day, and also they burp a lot, and they are incredibly gassy. They are actually burping and farting a lot as well. The thing about our guts is that they were specifically adapted for eating meat and fat. It's well known that during our evolution, our brain suddenly and rapidly increased in size at the same time our brain got bigger, our guts shrink. This trade-off meant that more energy could be allocated to our energy-expensive brains, but now, with smaller guts, we would have had to rely on more efficient calorie and nutrient-dense foods like meat and fat. Our gut is excellent at completely digesting meat thanks to our stomach acid, which is actually even stronger than many carnivorous animals. Okay, so what happens when you eat only meat? This woman feeds her show cats an all-meat diet. Now I do raw meat, I add little chicken hearts on top. He loves the hearts. She brags that one of the benefits of this is that there is considerably less poop to deal with. 98% of what they eat their body absorbs. It's 1 week's worth of poop in this entire bag for all these cans. Vilhomer Stephenson too noted that he straight up reduced his poop production by about 80%. When he ate a meat-and diet, that doesn't mean he's constipated, that means that the majority of what he eats is completely digested, so he doesn't have as much stuff to deposit into the toilet. And similarly today, many people are reporting that on the carnivore diet, they simply produce much less waste. So, I listened to the doctors, I ate more fiber, I consumed more plants, and I ended up losing my entire colon. Kent Carnivore probably has the clearest evidence of how much easier meat digests in plants. He had to have his colon removed, so rather than using the toilet, he has to empty a colostomy bag, which is connected directly to his small intestine, meaning he can see exactly how things are digested. I've eaten both a plant-based diet even since having this bag after my surgery and eating a carnivorous diet. I wear a bag I can actually see because I empty this thing multiple times a day. All animal products, right? Even red meat, they are all broken down entirely. Think about now plants, right? You find plants in your poop. If you just swallowed pieces of sweet corn, carrot, and peas and stuff like that, they're still there in red meat. It's a breeze. He now sticks to a carnivore diet for several health benefits, including dramatically better digestion and gut health. I create very little gas and wind in the bag, right? Doesn't really happen so much when I was eating plants. My bag filled up with air like I was blowing up like a balloon now. Before we move on, let's finally look at a 2021 study that surveyed 2029 carnivore dieters. 531 people said that they were doing the carnivore diet specifically to try and treat gut issues. I bet the average doctor would worry that this diet would worsen their patients' gut issues. But the complete opposite happened. Almost everyone, 97% of 531 people, improved or completely resolved their gut condition by eating a zero-fiber, zero-plant food diet at the end of the day. I'm not trying to argue that fiber is bad for everyone, but it certainly seems to be the case for some people. Further, the idea that we all absolutely need fiber clearly isn't right. The idea that you need fiber, it's like, no, you don't, that's wrong. And are plants necessary? Doesn't appear to be. You can live on meat. Now I know it's hard to make sense of this when we've been told for years about how fatty meat causes heart disease, and all these other problems. People have been claiming that meat causes this or that ailment since the early 1900s, which is why people were baffled when Vamer Stanson and Carson Anderson had success on A Year of Just Meat. Actually, just recently, Harvard claimed that red meat is linked to diabetes. Ironically, that earlier study on 2029 carnivore dieters was done by a team of researchers out of Harvard University. While we're limited to just this one paper, it does suggest that if the carnivore diet could be sold as a pill, it would immediately be the absolute best diabetes drug on the planet. 4,002 of the people in the study said that they went carnivore to manage their diabetes or insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is basically the first step that leads to diabetes. The carnivore diet was so effective that 74% of these people completely resolved their diabetes or insulin resistance, and 24% of them improved their condition. Putting that together, that's 98% of them experiencing a benefit from a meat-only diet. So how could red meat cause diabetes if an only meat diet seems to be fantastically effective for treating diabetes? Actually, a Doc John R. famously cured 2 diabetic patients way back in 1797 with a diet of only meat and fat. Okay, but before we move on, here's the other thing. A 2009 paper says that insulin resistance itself is likely the most single important cause of heart disease. Okay, so then how can red meat and saturated fat cause heart disease? If insulin resistance is the most important cause of heart disease, and a diet of only meat and fat reverses insulin resistance, When I first heard about this diet, I wasn't surprised that many people had benefits. After all, the diet cuts out processed food, wheat, soy, sugar, and vegetable oils. What really surprised me was that people were still experiencing improvements when switching from a very clean diet of just meat and greens to meat. Only I have to cut out the goddamn greens. Within a week I was 25% less anxious in the morning, and I've been better every single day. So why would cutting out the greens be good for some people? The simple fact is that the animals we eat will try to protect themselves by running away. Plants can't run away, so they have to protect themselves by attempting to poison whatever eats them. We learned 20 years ago that Brussels sprouts alone had over 136 identified human carcinogens in them, but also spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, every plant that you've ever come across in the grocery store, and not a single one had less than 60 known human carcinogens in them. I'm telling you, this is why, kids, no one likes Brussels sprouts, right? You know that bad taste, that bitter taste is your brain and your tongue. They can tell you like, hey, this is bad for you. Spit it out, plants are trying to kill you, how are they? Ralph, good, they taste like burning. Many everyday plant foods can be very dangerous to your dog. Like avocados, chocolate chives, garlic onions, leeks, coffee, tea grapes, macadamia nuts, walnuts, mushrooms, and other things. Plants create toxins because they're trying to prevent us from eating them. We of course know about all kinds of human allergies to plants like peanuts, tree nuts, soybeans, and wheat. But there are various other plant toxins that some people can react to the foods that are the worst, right, in terms of what's going to cause the most inflammation, the most gas obstructions: mushrooms, celery, cabbage, carrots, onions, nuts and seeds, pineapple, mango, brown rice. Oh daddy, this tastes like grandma in 2013. 5 little girls went to the hospital with second-degree burns after getting lime juice on their skin. A compound in the limes made their skin extremely sensitive to UV light. In 1989, a diabetic alcoholic man died just a few hours after eating tons of sorrel soup. Sorrel is similar to spinach, and like spinach it has plenty of oxalate. A paper on oxalate-induced kidney damage presents several case reports confirming kidney damage in people ingesting a large amount of oxalate-rich foods like peanuts, cashews, almonds, black tea, celery, beets, spinach, and so on. There are all kinds of other plant toxins. For example, the ghadin protein in wheat can damage the gut lining. Protease inhibitors and things like grains, nuts, and seeds, and soy can interfere with your digestion of protein, but obviously most of us can handle most plant foods. For example, sure, pineapple makes my mouth feel a bit weird, spinach makes me kind of queasy, gluten makes me a little sluggish, and mangoes, peanuts, and cauliflower can make me a little bit gassy. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal if I eat those every now and then. However, if I ate a lot of them every single day, I would start feeling pretty uncomfortable and low on energy. So the idea is that maybe small amounts of a variety of plant toxins at every single day can add up to where some people develop issues, even though they don't necessarily have a specific food allergy. Also, it's worth noting that we can't even absorb much of the nutrients in certain plants. For example, people say spinach is a good source of iron, but the oxalate in spinach blocks absorption of that iron. One study found only 2% of iron from spinach is absorbed. Beans are thought to be a good source of zinc, but there are several anti-nutrient compounds in beans that block the absorption of that zinc. In fact, if you eat black beans with oysters, the anti-nutrients in the beans even block the absorption of the zinc from the oysters. One study found that the anti-nutrients in corn were so potent that corn tortillas almost entirely blocked any zinc from oysters from being absorbed. Further, fiber itself has been found to block the absorption of minerals. We so often hear about how plants are chock full of this vitamin or that mineral. But I don't think most people realize you can get all the essential nutrients from just animal products. In fact, many nutrients are often better absorbed from meat. Even animal protein is better absorbed than plant protein.
I would get angry, hungry and angry and irritable. That is gone completely. I had anxiety and depression. I was very irritable all the time. Switching to the carnivore diet, I noticed this whole thing lifted, and suddenly I had mental clarity. I had energy. I had optimism almost within I'd say like a week or so. I noticed that my anxiety levels lowered, especially now carnivore. I have control over my anxiety. My energy was way up, my sleep was up, depression gone.
Let's take a look at why in the world mental health has improved for so many people doing a carnivore diet. First off, animal foods pack plenty of vitamins critical for brain function, things like iodine, iron, zinc, B vitamins, vitamins A and D, choline, creatine, and others. This may have a role in why a 2021 study found that people who don't eat meat have assigned significantly higher risk of depression and anxiety. I talked to a psychiatrist at McLean's Hospital. He's starting a treatment center at Milan. based on essentially on a carnivore diet to treat endogenous depression, manic depressive disorder, and schizophrenia. Now, as many people have pointed out, yes, there is certainly barely any research studying people on a carnivore diet, much less specifically looking at why mental health issues like depression would improve on this diet, but one reason may be inflammation. There are tons of papers on the role of inflammation in depression. Studies have found that people with depression have up to 50% higher levels of biomarkers for inflammation, and the risk of depression increases as inflammation increases. It's well known that giving the highly inflammatory substance LPS to various types of animals will reliably produce behavior that looks like depression or anxiety. And yes, a study in humans as well found that when people were injected with LPS, they experienced a dramatic rise in inflammation, and very quickly experience an increase in depressive symptoms like anxiety, feelings of social disconnection, and anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, its P-tic attack, further obesity, which is accompanied by higher levels of inflammation, is associated with depression. In fact, many of the known risk factors for a depression increase inflammation when arthritis pain makes the stairs feel like a summit in Upton Sinclair's 1911 book, The Fasting Cure. He claims that 5 cases of arthritis were cured by fasting with arthritis. The joints become swelled and painful because they are so inflamed. This might just sound like an old tale, but a 1983 paper did find that a 7-day fast dramatically reduced people's arthritis symptoms and cut markers of joint inflammation almost in half. Now that's an old study, but several other studies like this one from 1991 and another one from 2021 suggested that indeed fasting can improve arthritis symptoms.
Today is day 21 of my introduction to carnivore, my toe that's been bothering me for years. I can almost not feel any of the arthritis pain that I was getting in it. My mom went on the diet and her osteoarthritis went away.
One of the huge health issues that Michela Peterson fixed on our carnivore diet was arthritis that was so severe that she had to have surgery to replace the joints in her ankle and hip. Now Michela wasn't fasting, but the similarity between carnivore and fasting is that they both put you in ketosis. When you stop eating carbs for long enough, you go into ketosis, which is where your liver starts producing ketones from fat. And it's been clear since 2008 that increasing ketone production reduces inflammation in humans. I had a host of inflammatory conditions including peripheral uveitis, and it disappeared completely along with psoriasis and gastric reflux disorder. There are now a lot of papers on how anti-inflammatory keto is. In the textbook Ketogenic Diet and Metabolic Therapies, there's a whole chapter dedicated to keto's anti-inflammatory properties and how keto may help certain inflammatory diseases. Remember, that inflammatory substance LPS that researchers injected in rodents and humans to cause inflammation and anxiety and depression-like symptoms. This study found that ketosis is so anti-inflammatory that rodents doing a keto diet were significantly protected from the inflammatory effects of that LPS injection. Okay, so there is a serious lack of research on carnivore diets and mental health, but there is a decent amount of research finding keto diets to be beneficial for depression.
Almost my whole life being depressed with taking methylated B vitamins and going onto a ketogenic diet. I have been medication-free and completely symptom-free for 3.5 years. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I was so manic, I was so psychotic. Matt saw more than 40 clinicians, tried 29 different medications. I was taking all the medication as prescribed, and I was still sick in 2020. Jan reached out to Dr. Christopher Palmer, his suggestion for Matt, a ketogenic diet. Matt started a medical keto diet, it life-changing. I'd gone manic every March. I had to take 20 mg of this medication, or more. I went on the diet March of 2021. I sailed through 5 milligrams of this medication. No symptoms of hypomania, 0.
Now, inflammation isn't the sole reason ketosis is good for mental health. For example, Dr. Chris Palmer explains that the key benefit of a keto diet is that it is correcting defective metabolisms, and he says that mental disorders are actually metabolic disorders affecting the brain. But in any case, unless you're eating a ton of dairy or barely any fat on a carnivore diet, you're very likely going to be in ketosis. But as we already discussed, several people experience further mental health benefits when transitioning from a low-carb keto diet to a completely carnivore diet. That's a bit puzzling, but it may be because these people are especially sensitive to those toxins that plants make to defend themselves. And it's really quite something seeing these people. They're still shell-shocked by the transformation. You know, because it's really something to lose, say 150 lbs in a year. When I interviewed my wife and we talked about her carnivore diet, I'd say 99% people who had the exact same story as her. Well, and I've met literally hundreds of people on my tour. They show me pictures, but it was going to be a 30-day experiment. I thought, how bad could it be? And here I am 10 years later. So is this the perfect diet you should be doing forever? Well, Jordan Peterson and Dr. Sean Baker are two famous cases of doing this diet for extremely long, over 6 years straight, and they're doing great. This isn't the case for everyone though. But after a year and a half, I quit the carnivore diet. I know that, like myself, there are a lot of people who eat carnivore or ketogenic diets, and they run into issues. Dr. Paul Saladino was a very prominent advocate of a pure carnivore diet. I don't think there are any risks to eating animal foods exclusively. There are no risks eating a carnivore diet led to full resolution of my autoimmune condition, eczema, itchy rashes, and asthma that I'd had for my whole life. He even wrote a book about it in 2019. Finally, he ended up introducing some specific carbohydrates into his meat-heavy diet because he was having electrolyte issues. His free testosterone was lower and his thyroid function was lower. So why exactly the diet stops being magical for some people is a big question for another time. But for now, one issue that people can run into while on a keto or carnivore diet is low electrolytes, which brings us to the sponsor of this video, Element. Plenty of fasting benefits from carnivore, keto, or even fasting come from reducing insulin, but reducing insulin will have you pee out more electrolytes, so adding electrolyte to your water can really bring your energy levels back up. I've done a carnivore diet and I found I felt much better, especially in the adaptation phase when I add a bit of salt and electrolytes from LMNT to my water, especially if I felt like I didn't have as much energy at the gym as usual. A bit of salt and some LMNT was my go-to fix, actually, even if I'm not doing carnivore or keto. I find LMNT keeps my energy levels up. LMNT tastes great, and my favorite thing is its simple ingredients. It has a balanced mix of electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and magnesium, along with natural flavors and some stevia. A whole serving only has 2 carbs. If you want 0 carbs, there's also a raw and flavor type. If you go to drinklmnt.com, what I've learned, you can get a free sampler pack with any purchase. Also be sure to try the new LMNT Sparkling. It's a bold, refreshing 16 Oz can of sparkling electrolyte water.